Ah, yep. So hello everyone, it's 12 o'clock and we're going to be starting in a couple of minutes, just giving people time to log on. And I hope it will record to my account as I am the host, but either way we will eventually get this recording available to people who can't be here now to watch via the International Programs in Agriculture at OSU website. And while we're waiting for people to log in, and we'll begin shortly, I just wanted to promote the next talk in this series. As you can see, Carlos Bolanos from the Department of Plant Pathology will be speaking Friday, October 9th at noon. And some of you might not be able to see the full title of his talk because it's covered with images of people talking and listening. Don't forget that you can use your cursor, your mouse to minimize those pictures. But you can see his talk has the traditional cultural component about the people and history of Ecuador, but it also has a narrower scientific focus um, of a pathogen that is threatening crops there. And I'll be sending out announcements about this in the traditional way a few weeks in advance, and then reminders as we come closer on. And I'll say a perfunctory but heartfelt apology that COVID is prohibiting us from having food at such events. But this presentation will be a feast for the eyes, if nothing else. And I would like to introduce the co-sponsor of this talk. The sponsors are, of course, the Wooster Diversity Committee. The co-sponsor is International Programs in Agriculture. And this year we've been lucky to have a member of our campus, the plant pathologist, Luis Cañas, keeping Wooster on the radar screen of main campus for everything international. He's the man to talk to if you're considering widening your horizons. Luis?
Yes, thank you, Jason. And yes, I serve now as Interim Director of International Programs in Agriculture for our college. And also I continue to serve in entomology as well as a faculty member. And so thank you, Jason, for such organization. This has been one really great event that has helped us to connect in many ways to different cultures in different areas of the world. And so I'm quite happy to see how it's evolving, how it's moving along. And so I'll let you introduce our speaker today, but suffice to say that it's great to see those of you that are participating here. And and so yeah, thank you all, and go ahead.
Thank you. I had heard a rumor that a Swede named Jelmer had come to one of the campuses in this town, and you'll soon find out the correct pronunciation of his name and how that rumor might have gotten started. Um, without further ado, our speaker.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. You should be able to see my screen now. So my name is Jelmer Poelstra. I'm actually Dutch rather than Swedish, but I did live in Sweden for a while, as I'll briefly mention on the next slide as well. And today I'll talk to you a little bit about the Netherlands, which is the country that I grew up in. And the title of the talk is oliebollen and onions below the ocean. And if that sounds a little cryptic, I will also explain the title. So first off, who am I? So I was born and grew up in the Netherlands, studied biology at Groningen University in the Netherlands. Then I moved to Sweden to do a PhD in evolutionary genetics at Uppsala University. And then I moved to North Carolina, first Chapel Hill and then Durham, to do postdocs at UNC Chapel Hill and Duke. And these are some of the organisms that I've worked on. So I did my PhD on crows on the left, and then postdocs on cichlid fish in the middle, and mouse lemurs from Madagascar on the right. And all of this work was basically looking at genomics of speciation in these organisms. And since about 3 months, I work at the MCIC in Wooster. And my main hobby is bird watching, which I like to do wherever and whenever I can. So locally, wherever I live, like on the North Carolina beach on the left, but also travel the world around to see different birds in different countries, like in Thailand on the right. So on to the main topic of today, which is the country of the Netherlands. Starting with a brief overview. It's a very small country. So between brackets here, I've put a couple of comparisons with the state of Ohio. So the Netherlands is about a third of the size of Ohio, but it has more than 50% more people, over 17 million. So it's a pretty high population density, namely the 16th highest in the world, and it's the highest in Europe, and also among countries of similar total number of inhabitants. There are only 3 or 4 similar ones, with most of the other very high density countries being very tiny countries. So it's a very densely populated country. You can see the flag on the top left, not to be confused with the flag of France, which is shown in the country of France on the map. And the countries that border the Netherlands are Belgium and Germany. The main language that's spoken in the Netherlands is Dutch, and the governance type is it's a constitutional monarchy. So here we can see our current king and queen, and you can also see that there's a lot of orange there. So orange is kind of the national Dutch color. It has to do with the name of the lineage that led to the royal family. And interestingly, the Netherlands is also responsible for carrots being almost exclusively orange currently. There used to be all sorts of colors, but the orange form was popularized in the Netherlands, and this actually happened around the time of Dutch independence from Spain, and it is said or rumored that this was actually to promote the Dutch royal family. There's also some name confusion that's always going on with the Netherlands. The first of that is the name Holland. So Holland is a very common sort of alternative name, but technically incorrect name, at least in English, for the Netherlands. Actually, part of the Netherlands is Holland, basically. So there are two provinces shown here in red, North Holland and Zuid-Holland, which are named Holland. And that is in fact where most of the big cities, including Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, as well as most of the main attractions are. So that makes the confusion quite understandable. And then there's also the fact that the language is called Dutch rather than Netherlandish or something like that. And this is especially confusing if you know that Germans call their language Deutsch. And this is in fact a sort of confusion. So it had to do with the British confusing or lumping Germanic languages. So what about the title, oliebollen and onions below the ocean? What's that all about? So oliebollen are sort of deep fried dough balls that are only eaten around New Year's Eve in the Netherlands. So it's a very traditional type of food. Then onions. The Netherlands is actually the number one exporter of onions in the world. And I'll talk a little bit more about the main agricultural products, onions and others in the Netherlands later on. And then below the ocean, this is probably sort of well-known fact, is that the Netherlands is a very low-lying country. So nether, the Netherlands also stands for lower in position. So 26% of the current landmass is actually below sea level, and 21% of the population lives below sea level. And it's pretty flat and low all across. So the highest point over here is the Valserberg, which is basically no more than a small hill at about 1,000 feet of height. Before I go on, I just wanted to mention that whenever you have questions, please feel free to just interject. You don't need to save them until the end. So we've all heard some good things about the Dutch. There are a number of sayings that have the word Dutch in them, and well, they actually don't tend to be very good. So double Dutch is basically gibberish. A Dutch treat or going Dutch is paying for yourself. To be Dutched, cancelled. Dutch nightingales are frogs. And a Dutch concert is noise, such as made by a group of drunken Dutch. And there are actually many more similar expressions, some of which were so kind of foul that I didn't even want to put them in this presentation. And we have the British to thank for this. So in the 17th century, the Netherlands fought 3 or 4 wars with Britain, and they did some propaganda to make the Dutch look bad. And several of these are still quite common. I think double Dutch and going Dutch are fairly common expressions still. So in the rest of this presentation, there are 5 topics that I'd like to run by, which is the province of Friesland, bicycles, tulip mania, some agricultural tidbits, and a slightly longer section on land reclamation, which I think is an interesting topic, quite unique to the Netherlands, and has a lot to do with agriculture as well. But first, I thought I should mention the province of Friesland, which is the province that I was born in and grew up in until I went off to college. Friesland actually has its own language, which is Frisian. It's quite similar to Dutch, but it is considered a distinct language, and it has, among other things, some distinct word modifications like this caret above the A. The Frisian, I don't know what to call it. It's never been a country, but in, I think, around the 9th century or so, the Frisian empire or whatever actually extended across quite a bit bigger area than it does now. So it extended all across the northern half, well, not the northern half, but the northern part of the Netherlands, and then into Germany and Denmark as well. So in a part of Germany, they also still speak a different variety of Frisian, East Frisian. So it's West Frisian versus East Frisian. And in Friesland, we do such sophisticated sports like vierlepen, which is jumping across a ditch with a pole and trying to get as far as possible. As well as mudflat hiking, which is the walking across intertidal flats. So here on this little map, these islands here in front of the coast are the Dutch barrier islands, basically. And 4 of them are Frisian. And you can actually walk to these islands at low tide. So the entire, the sea, the Wadden Sea, this is the North Sea and this is the Wadden Sea, most of it becomes a mudflat during low tide. So these people are hiking to one of the islands. And then the other big Frisian thing would be ice skating. There's a long tradition of ice skating, including a 200-kilometer race called the Elfstedentocht, which means 11 cities tour. So it goes by 11 Dutch cities, 200 kilometers in total. Unfortunately, it's not been held for, I think, maybe 15 or 20 years now. It's been steadily decreasing in frequency ever since it started, which was, I think, the early 20th century, as winters have gotten warmer. So it's becoming harder and harder to actually do this ice skating. Next thing I want to talk about is bicycles, another classic Dutch thing. So here we have our Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte, who's biking to work in The Hague while eating an apple. And so people, like the Prime Minister, people really do bike a lot, and they bike not only for fun, but bike to work as well. So there's a real kind of bike rush hour. And about 25% of trips by Dutch people are actually done by bike, which is the highest percentage in the world. Only in Denmark it comes anywhere close, and then some other Western European countries there's a fair bit of biking going on as well, and then US is all the way
so
over.
no helmets? They don't wear helmets?
No, generally not. So this has become, it's a good question. This has become a bit more common recently, but no, people traditionally, and also here Mark Rutte is not wearing a helmet. People traditionally don't wear helmets. And I'm not entirely sure why this is. I mean, well, I guess one reason for it would be that the biking infrastructure is quite good. So people bike on bicycle paths often separated from the main road. Clearly not in this picture, as you can see. But often the biking is separated from the cars. And also people don't necessarily bike very fast. It's mostly to get places. So people have not, I guess, felt the necessity to do it, but it is definitely becoming more and more common. Um, yeah. So, well, that's a good question. So, in comparison to the U.S. in particular, it's an incredible difference, and it's a very it's actually maybe the largest difference for me personally in day-to-day life, that sort of biking culture versus car culture in the Netherlands versus the US. So yeah, so many bikes leads to bikes being everywhere in the streets, and sometimes also stowing problems. So this is a biking a large bike rack at a train station, and it seems you can never build these big enough. They're always overflowing. This is actually, so biking has always been big in the Netherlands, but when cars became more prominent, it actually became less and less common as it became more and more dangerous. And and cars were sort of everywhere, and pushing bikes out basically. But then there were big protests. One of the reasons for that was that hundreds of small children were getting killed every year, getting in collision with cars, and that actually led to the construction of all these cycling paths. So this was a very sort of deliberate effort, and then biking came back big time and became maybe bigger than it ever was before. And so this kind of shows that change. And this is actually not a cycling path, but a city center. So it's been both. It's been a big effort of trying to push cars out of certain places, including city centers. So here, so many city centers are completely car free, like here. Then I want to talk a bit about tulips. So the Netherlands produces 2 billion tulips per year. Many can be seen in the world's largest flower garden, which is Keukenhof. And tulip mania is interesting. This is actually the first recorded financial bubble, as far as I know, in history. Tulips were very popular in the, I think this was around the 16th, 17th century. They were very popular, but mostly just as a hobby object. That the traders were hobbyists too. But the prices just went up and up, and eventually, for some tulips, they were being sold for the price of a house, essentially. And this bubble eventually burst as people, as more and more people got in on the trade, because people were making so much money off it. Eventually, it burst like a classic financial bubble, and they went back to more normal prices. Interestingly, some of the most popular tulips were these type, which were called Semper Augustus, with the sort of red streaks. And this is actually caused by a virus. And so that's of course interesting, because you couldn't reliably breed it if it was caused by a virus, which made it even sort of all the more popular. And people had no idea about this at the time. But it was a very much wanted type of tulip. Some agricultural tidbits. So there's a ton of agriculture in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world, after the US. There's a lot of onions, as I already mentioned. So that's number one onion exporter. The same is true for potatoes as well. So about 30% of all of the Netherlands is actually arable land. And there's also a lot of meat and dairy production. So about 23% of the land is pasture. So it's cows everywhere. And then there's also a massive greenhouse infrastructure where mostly tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers are being produced. And this is mostly concentrated in Zuid-Holland, one of the Hollands. and it does lead to massive light pollution. It's sometimes crazy to see on a dark night. You can see it from very far away. So on the right is a satellite image showing light pollution, and this sort of big red cloud over here. A lot of that is caused by greenhouses. So how did the Netherlands get so much agriculture? Or, I'm not a historian and I don't know that much about agriculture. But I think the main reason is probably simply having fertile, flat, very amenable soil all around. But I think there's also two other interesting factors where some historical events come in. One of them being the hunger winter that the Netherlands had in 1944-45, when only the southern quarter or so of the Netherlands had been liberated from Nazi occupation, and the Nazis were losing, and they basically led that part, the still occupied part, to its own devices, and many people starved. So after the war ended, there was a big sort of policy effort to have a large agricultural production to be sort of self-sufficient. And then another interesting thing is land reclamation. And so land reclamation has made possible for the Netherlands to do a lot more agriculture. And this too, some historical events that play key roles here. So one of the big ones being the flood of 1916, which happened in the Zuider Zee. And the Zuider Zee is, or was, it doesn't exist anymore, was this sea over here. It actually also didn't used to exist. So this is about 500 years Common Era, when there was basically just a large lake. But as the sea level rose over the next 1500 years, by the 19th, 20th century, this was actually connected to the Wadden Sea and the North Sea eventually. And that led to a lot of floodings. So whenever there were big storms, the land around here would flood. So then people decided to dam off this sea. So over here, a big dam was built with a road on top of it called the Afsluitdijk, so that the whole thing inside became a lake, and that also then enabled land reclamation. So then on this map here on the right, all the dark green parts are reclaimed lands in which was done between the, I think, 40s until 70s, 80s. So here's a big part, and then this over here is Flevoland, which is actually a province right now. So it's the 12th province of the Netherlands. So it's entirely consists of land that was reclaimed in the last century. And so that meant also that from having a sea over here, it went to a lake with not as salt water, so it would occasionally freeze too. And this is actually me back in probably about 1990, when there was a very severe winter, and people could skate from Southwest Friesland over here to North Holland across the lake. So me and my dad went all across the lake that winter. So, and here's sort of a satellite view of the changes. The big one being obviously from here to here, the construction of Flevoland, but also here in the Southwest, a lot of land was reclaimed in smaller projects. So this is Flevoland, that new province currently, and almost all of it is agricultural land. That and 2 cities and some major nature reserves and wind turbines. There was actually a plan to reclaim even more land. So this part over here, which is also a rather big portion of what's now still the IJsselmeer, or actually technically Markermeer. This was canceled eventually because for a couple of reasons. One of them being that as agricultural output per square meter went up, it actually turned out that the Netherlands needed less agriculture later on than they thought they would earlier on. So while they had planned for the Mark of Art, a big reclamation project, this basically wasn't necessary anymore by the time people were going to start with this project. So now it's actually still a lake, but there were big ecological problems. The lake became very dirty, basically, and then they started a project that would collect all the silk and become some man-made islands. That's now a big nature reserve, which this has actually only been finished in the last couple of years. And people generally can't visit it, but I think occasionally they do sort of excursions there. But then there was another flood after the construction of Flevoland, which was in the southwest, and this one was actually much bigger even than the one early in the 20th century. So 2,500 people died. Thousands and thousands of livestock and poultry drowned, and almost 10% of Dutch farmland was flooded. So this happened in the southwest in Zeeland, where I also showed that there had been a lot of land reclamation throughout the years, but no big damming project. So that then became a necessity. So after this this flood, the Delta Plan was started, which involved building a number of very large dams to connect all these basically islands and peninsulas, and to keep the sea at bay also in that area. The only part they didn't dam was here because it led to the port of Antwerp, which is a huge port. So these dams were constructed one by one, but actually eventually there were also protests when the last one was going to be constructed, which is, I think, one of the more northern ones, because of course it has huge ecological consequences when you dam off areas that are connected to the sea. So there are large sort of intertidal zones with mudflats, just like the mudflats I showed you earlier that you can hike on, which is very important for a lot of animals. Many birds migrate through their shorebirds. So there were big protests actually to then also completely close that last bit of sea. So then a perhaps typical example of Dutch compromise was happened, and here this dam then became a dam that is that can open and close. So most of the time it's open. So here it's in almost closed condition. So these things can move over there. Then it's completely open. So this connects to the sea. And if there's a storm, it will close. So this way, the Oosterschelde, as this is called, is still connected to the sea, still has tidal zones, but is also better protected from storms. And the latest big project that the Netherlands is doing in this vein is it's called Room for the River, and it involves having large areas around rivers that are basically available for flooding. So over here, this is sort of the river at its normal level, but it can expand during high water. immensely. But the question is, of course, whether this will be enough, and in particular, in fact, for the Delta plan. So all these dams, they were designed to last essentially forever, but at least for hundreds of years, and without sea level rise in the sea level, they should. And so far, all these dams have been 100% successful. But of course, with if the sea levels is going to rise as much as they're now projected to be, it's basically just not enough. It's not high enough. And then the sort of problem of so much of the Netherlands being already below sea level really comes around the corner. So yeah, the Netherlands is definitely in a precarious position over here. And then finally, I just wanted to close with a couple of pictures. These are actually all made by my mom, and I think they show the Dutch landscape quite nicely. So here's an example of a dike. This is actually, there's summer dikes and winter dikes. So during part of the year, the lands will be used for agriculture, and other parts of the year they can flood. And one of the many windmills. This is one of the barrier islands. This too, lots of lighthouses. And lots of salt marshes as well over there. And that's it. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, Jelmer, I have a question, but I would say great job. I mean, nice pictures, nice story, of course. I would say before I forget, then welcome Dr. Harry Hoiting. He's an emeritus professor from plant pathology, and I see him there, obviously on the presentation. My question relates to greenhouses. One of the things that is always impresses me is every time I travel and I land in Schiphol, then you could see the sea of greenhouses. And obviously you alluded to these being a very important industry. Do you know when this push to be so successful in greenhouses started, and maybe why?
No, actually, I don't. I mean, no, I don't think I know anything particular about that.
Yeah, no, great. I was curious because it's always, obviously a lot of over the years, we've had a lot of successful greenhouse businesses in the US. And interestingly enough, many of those businesses were started by immigrants from the Netherlands, right? Which had the knowledge and the technology and all that. And it's been quite impressive. So thanks for the pictures.
I don't know any specifics. I mean, in general, I can imagine, since the Netherlands is so agriculture focused, I assume people were looking for new ways, new and more productive ways to do that, and probably very deliberately started all the lighthouse, or I mean the greenhouse projects.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
It started in 1971. Are you still there?
There we go.
Okay, am I live?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Harry Hoiting. The greenhouse industry, has been there for 200 years and more. But in 1971, when computers first were being used to control systems, the Dutch invented, in a large way, a national team. They put together engineers, biochemists, plant physiologists, plant pathologists, horticulturalists, and so on, to begin this industry. And that's what really led to these advanced systems that are now called closed greenhouse systems, that if you have never looked at them, the technology is amazing. They're literally light years ahead. But it goes back to that decision.
Cool. Thanks, Harry.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. And my question came because I was at a meeting yesterday where they, of course, are still showing leadership on that area, where they had a competition for, I guess, developing the first completely automated greenhouse. And we were talking to a team from, or a gentleman that was first on Microsoft, that developed an AI system that basically now can run the greenhouse with minimal human input and then be as competitive as if you had all the growers working there. So we'll see where that takes us. But yeah, thank you both for the comments.
Microsoft just invested $1 billion right next to a greenhouse in the last 4 years in a little town called Middenmeer. And Google spent another $1 billion next door. So the investments by the US are also amazing.
Well,
Yes, and I recall Dr. Hoyning talking about the wave of Dutch experts who've gone around the world for projects involving both flood control, but also greenhouse-related activities. So a definite export activity, and even Professor Kanyas and others on our campus have been involved with the sea of greenhouses that you can see by heading to the southernmost point of Canada. If you look on Google Maps of Leamington, Ontario, which is right across from the islands off the coast of Ohio, you think, how can a building be that big? And actually, I think 5% of all the immigrant farm workers are right there in that little town. In all of gigantic Canada are right there in that little town of Leamington. And while I'm talking, if anyone that wouldn't object, if you could show yourself. We traditionally take a photo at the end of the event, and this event, unfortunately, it's a smaller group than we usually get, and that's particularly a pity because with Jelmer being new here, as we know, he's come at the most impossible semester in history to get to know people. I think this is further proof, because this talk was actually promoted more than previous talks, but I think even if he had been serving oil balls and onions out of the ocean, more people would have come, because we have had some really great meals and that 15-minute opportunity to sit next to someone you know, or hopefully someone you don't know, and talk. So that's not an attempt to interrupt the flow of questions. Please, any other questions?
Just another comment, the greenhouse system, the typical size now going in is 100 acres, a single building.
Oh.
Yeah. And those are independent units, and basically there are just robots inside, and depending upon the crop, there can be as many as 150 people working in there as roving individuals with scissors, cutting plants off, putting them on belts.
Yeah, and we're beginning to see that kind of level of investment here in Ohio, with at least 4 or 5 different companies coming in the last 5, 8 years, and with the goals of having such massive operations. I mean, just one that is almost complete, if not completed now, is of Toledo, and yeah, about 100 acres of production of tomatoes, peppers, and so on.
Yep.
So that
Yep.
that'll continue to work to grow. I do have another question, Jelmer, and obviously you mentioned the food that you eat in New Year's. Is there any other food that you would recommend that you say, oh, this is what I would have because this is so distinctive Dutch? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a good one. I actually started out having a little food section, but then I took it out because overall I would say that Dutch food, unfortunately, is not very inspiring. You know, there are some highlights, but it's yeah, the traditional meal dinner is basically cooked potatoes, one type of vegetable, and then some meat, like a meatball. And for lunch, it's almost always just sandwiches. So it's very dull overall. But there are some highlights, and some of them are actually also available here. So a very typical one is stroopwafels, which are a type of cookie. So I think there's a lot of good baking in general going on. So the bread is pretty good, and there are a lot of good. So the stroopwafel is actually one that somehow managed across, and you can get it here. But I would say there's a lot of nice types of cookies and bakeries that you can get. Another thing that's kind of interesting, though, and definitely something to try when you're in the Netherlands, though not necessarily all that good either, is sort of snack food. So so the typical snack food is besides French fries, some deep fried stuff, including frikadellen and croquetten. And so this is deep fried, and they're like usually longish things, and they're rest meat. So frikadellen and croquetten, I think they can have all sorts of rest meat that otherwise would get thrown away in it, and it's pretty good as far as snack food goes. So, and you can get that sort of all across the street, and it's very fast. So if you walk to Amsterdam, it's that would be something to try. And then cheese, I guess. Cheese is maybe the other thing. There's a lot of cheese. Gouda kaas. This tends to be pronounced here as Gouda, but in Dutch it's pronounced Gouda. It's of course one of the more well-known ones. But there's a lot of good cheese going around as well. So I definitely try that too. Amsterdam has quite a lot of cheese shops.
Great, thank you. I'll sure try it next time.
And I had a question of anything else you miss in the Netherlands, or yeah, some cultural or material difference.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I kind of already alluded to that, but that's definitely for me the biggest thing is basically how cities are organized, and then mainly with respect to essentially keeping cars out. I guess that's the big thing. So to have city centers, like in the picture that I showed, where you can walk and there are no cars, and also being able to bike everywhere with nice biking trails. So that for me, that is definitely, and that because that really, I guess it really impacts a lot. It just makes cities, being in a city, quite a different experience, and I definitely miss that. Like the way you would walk around in a city or bike around in a city, the way everything here rather is you go by car everywhere. I think that's yeah, for me that's definitely the thing I miss the most.
Well, that's a great segue into an event happening this very day in Worcester, which is the hilliest city I've ever lived in, which the hills have made me a better bicyclist. Um, we have Martin Lubell of FABE fame is going to tell us about that event as soon as he unmutes. Yeah, it's,
Sorry
Yeah,
about
there you
that.
go.
Can you hear me well?
Yep.
yes.
Okay, so want to introduce my friend Delbert, who came with me to France, and he loves Holland too. He'd love to go there. I'm a big fan of bicycling, and we are organizing today the first antisocial Wooster bike ride. So the plan is you come to Wooster. So we've invited people from Akron Bike Party and Canton Bike Party and the Cleveland Critical Mass. So of course, not many people are going to drive, but they park anywhere in Worcester and they ride any direction they want as in Worcester, and they track their route with Strava. Strava is a cool app that tracks your route. And then we're going to collect all those maps and superimpose them onto a big map that we'll have at the ride-on at the bike store. So even if it's a short thing in your neighborhood, then keep track of it.
Yeah,
Sure.
and that's the free version of the app is good
All right.
enough to do that.
Thanks for letting me introduce that. And it's a Wooster Bike. It's a nonprofit organization that we've started setting up, 501c3. And there's different ways of, there's different elements where we're also funding a mural, a 50-foot long mural by 8 foot that's going to be on Ride-On. We're also buying rickshaws actually from Holland. They have a cool rickshaw that has the riders in the back and the baskets in the front with the 2 passengers. So the passengers don't have to watch the rider's back. So, but they cost about $5,000. So they're expensive, but they're kind of cool. And of course, anybody who's never gone to Holland, you have to go check out. I mean, the bicycle stuff is so cool. So neat. Anyway, thank you.
And it is with great sorrow that I announce an otherwise happy event. Remember, at noon on Friday, October 9th, when John Lennon would have turned 80, Carlos Bolanos will be speaking to us. And the sadness is we have a general sadness of having no new grad students coming to us internationally this semester. Funding for my position is running out October 15th, so this will be my last cultural connection as host, but I'm meeting next week with campus administrators trying to figure out who can best take over different parts of my job. So if you or anyone you would like to recruit, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Anyone you would like to recruit to get involved for keeping international activities going strong. So I took the traditional group photo with the snipping tool on my computer, and this recording will be available on the ipa.osu.edu, the International Programs in Agriculture website, starting next week. So with that, I would like to thank everyone who attended, and especially thank Jelmer. Anyone else?
I was going to say, Jason, I sincerely appreciate all the work that you've done. These events have been really great. And so obviously we're hoping that in one way or another, then these continue. But personally, I appreciate all the hard work that you put for everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, until next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Jelmer.
Jason. Bye-bye. See you
Have a
later.
good day.
Aaron.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Jason. Thank you,
My
speaker.
pleasure.
You're welcome.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Oh, and yeah, we'll see where the recording ends up. It should end up with me.
Yeah, let me know if you can't. I've not recorded a talk before, so I wouldn't know where it would
Yeah,
end.
it will give you it will give one of us a message in a few minutes.
Oh yeah,
Bye.
because I do need to. I can stop it now, right? Because it is still
Yes.
recording.
Yeah, you can go ahead and stop it.